Hello and welcome to the program where we talk on matters to do with law, justice and legal affairs. And you may perhaps have come across the name property purchase and heard people talking about purchasing a property. That is our topic of discussion today, because we are going to help you to unlearn and learn new state laws that govern this particular process of property purchase. And with me today is my guest, who is Sam Wakabu Njunge, an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, who will help me in talking about property purchase. Welcome, Sam, to the program.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sambu.
And I would just like us to begin the conversation on this particular matter of property purchase. Like everybody talks about property purchase, but there is no specifics on what should I buy and what should I not buy and can be considered as property. So we begin at this point. What can someone consider as a property to purchase?
Okay. Now, initially, before a law called the Immovable Properties was enacted, most people were thinking about, when you talk about property, most people are thinking about land. But then with coming into effect of what we call the Immovable Properties Act, the term property was extended to involve things like cars, because car is also a property. Some people actually even buy what has been cultivated on land, so that is property. So when you talk about property, it can generally be classified into two: immovable property and movable property. Movable property is something that can be moved. Now we are talking about a vehicle that can be moved from one place to the other. Then there is what we call the immovable property. That is something that can't be moved. When you talk about land, that is something that is fixed. So there is land and any other development that might be on that particular property, because as you've seen, especially in Nairobi, people are doing a lot of apartments. So when you talk even about a unit within that particular development, that is also a property. So property, we can say in brief that it can be said to be movable and movable property. But I think in this particular discussion, we might look more into the immovable property. Then maybe in the course of this series, we can look into the movable properties.
I think you touched on a very important aspect of property purchase, that is the immovable property, yes. That is entailing the lands and apartments. Yes. Anybody or somebody intending now to buy such a property, yes. Would you take us through the procedure that someone has to follow before they make a purchase of such a property? Okay.
Now, maybe some people might not have, maybe do not understand, maybe if I may also explain the need for an advocate, because I think what we normally do, it involves ensuring that whatever someone is buying, whatever you're buying is genuine. So now the process is quite straightforward, because what needs to be done is that someone has to identify a property. So the first step in buying any property involves identification. So the moment you identify a property, then there are some aspects like searches. So the moment you identify a property and maybe you discuss the terms, the other process will be conducting searches. Because now, as we've seen, there are some properties which we can say are not genuine. And some people, especially in Kenya, I think you've seen people being charged with fraud. So the first thing that you have to do when you're buying any property is to conduct a search. A search, now when it involves a property like land, that means you have to visit the respective registry, confirm that indeed the person who is indicated in the title also has records at the lands office. The moment you have done a search, the next step, most people actually hurry and maybe pay a deposit, but you can't pay a deposit if someone is yet to sign an agreement. So then people sit down, agree on the terms of the purchase. So once the terms are agreeable to everyone, you go to the next step of signing an agreement. The moment now you sign an agreement, the agreement normally stipulates what is to be expected for this property to be transferred in your name. So in this sale agreement, amongst the things that people agree on are maybe on the amount that is payable, at what point this amount will be paid, and also on something called the completion date. The completion date, basically, if I may explain it, is more like the date on which payment is supposed to be done. Because as we've said, you see, an agreement can't run forever. There must be a time period within which the money needs to be paid. People need to exchange the sum. And as I've said, the deposit is first payable upon execution of the agreement. Then once the other party is also ready, because now the moment you pay the deposit, that gives the person who is selling in legal term we call them the vendor, it gives them time to go and collect all the documents which are required. Because the sale of a property doesn't just involve a sale agreement, there is also the transfer aspect. But before you even get to the transfer aspect, there are some documents that must be obtained by the person who is selling. Now, if the land is agricultural, that person has to obtain the consent from the Land Control Board. So that person must go and get those particular consent. If a property is freehold, there is also the consent that has to be obtained from the Commissioner of Lands. So basically, depending on the type of titles, and maybe something else that is also very important that I think I should mention at this particular point, is that if you are talking about land itself, there are different regimes under which land is held. Land can be held under something we call freehold. Freehold, I'm going to explain it. That is hiyo ni zile mashamba za kule mashambani. Ukienda huko, you'll find that most people are holding land such that in perpetuity, such that they are not expected to pay any lease to the government. So basically, that land is yours forever. But then there are properties within Nairobi which are held under leasehold. If a property is being held under leasehold, that means you have to pay the government some rent. So basically, it's like the government has rented to you that particular property. And at the end of the day, the government is expecting you to pay them, just like the way if you have rented a house, you're supposed to pay the monthly rent. So when it comes to the government, you're also supposed to pay the annual rent. So that is the difference between the leasehold and the freehold. And that also, since there are two regimes, also the documents that we call the completion documents might be different. But basically, my point is, the moment someone pays the deposit, the completion date is the time within which one party is expected to have collected all the documents, and on the other hand, the person who is buying, because maybe you might not have the the entire cash with you, the entire sum with you. So you expected that within, let's say, 30, 90 days, whichever days the parties might agree, you're also going to have the money so as to pay the deposit. So that's what we call the completion. So the process, in simple, it involves conducting the searches, doing the sale agreement, signing the sale agreement, then thereafter the parties get the consents, the documents which are required. The other party is supposed also to maybe ensure that he has the money to pay the balance of the purchase price. Then once every party has those documents, then the transfer process takes place.
For something like a land, yes. a land purchase, yes. and a property purchase such as an apartment someone wants to purchase, yes. The two of them being different. Now yes. This one is a pure land, yes. And this other one is a well brought up building. Yes. For anyone willing to purchase any of those, is there a different procedure that they follow, or what kind of a situation could someone purchasing an apartment, yes. And the one purchasing a land face while at the process?
The process is similar, because still you have to go through that process. What is different is the documentation, because now when it comes to buying some maybe land which is not built, maybe a vacant land, the process is what I've outlined. But when it comes to buying an apartment, you know, there are so many entities which are involved when someone is building an apartment. So you'll find that if you intend on buying an apartment, apart from being interested on the sale agreement and maybe the title over that particular apartment, you might also be interested in the approvals, because before you build any apartment, you have to get approvals. And you've seen some houses being demolished. That is because maybe when someone was following up on the approvals, maybe they didn't get all the approvals. So when it comes to an apartment, yes, the process is similar, but then the documentation is very different. Because now, if at all you fall into the trap of buying an apartment and you've not taken into account that there are some approvals which were supposed to be obtained, and maybe unfortunately the developer didn't obtain those particular approvals, that's when you find that apartments are being demolished because there are those approvals that someone didn't obtain. So yes, the process is similar, but then the documentation is what the difference, that's where the difference arises. Yes.
And now talking about the entire process, yes. on land purchase or rather apartment purchase, yes. and in general property purchase, yes. Of course you've mentioned about the legal procedure that has to follow and the need of why you should require an advocate to help you in the process. As an advocate, or rather in the legal process, what are some of the things that you look out so that you can know that this seller is a genuine seller and the property being sold is a genuine property?
Now, what normally happens, and actually, I remember there was a case that I was dealing with, whereby someone produces a title to you, and actually even produces their identification documents, and definitely once you have a title with you and you have a copy of the ID, you are more than comfortable proceeding with the transaction because those are the documents that you expected to receive. But with time, people have. I think maybe people are more exposed, and people are more prone to maybe engaging in businesses which can be said to be fraudulent. And so, as the advocates, once you give an advocate maybe instructions to ensure that a property is transferred, first what you've done is maybe that's just like an insurance. It's just like the normal insurance that you take. So basically, you are assured that once I conduct this transaction and a title comes out in my name, then this is going to be a genuine title. So as an advocate, what you expected to do, the moment a title is given to you so that you can, for your due diligence, we call it due diligence, the first thing you have to do is visit the registry and ensure that the records are in order. Now, apart from just visiting the registry, we sometimes go to the extent of obtaining the green card. The green card basically shows you the history of dealings over that particular property. And you see, for a green card, unlike a title, people can produce a title unfortunately, this is unfortunate to say, they can produce a title in the streets of Nairobi. But now for the green card itself, that one gives an assurance that this is the history of this particular property. So once we are done with the searches at Lands Office, or concurrently as we are undertaking search at Lands Office, then we also visit the Registrar of Persons, because they are the custodians of the records relating to people. So we take the ID and confirm that indeed this ID is genuine. The moment they give you a confirmation that this is a genuine ID, then at least you are free, you are comfortable to proceed with that transaction, because you know that you are dealing with a genuine person. And it's very important actually to conduct this due diligence, because as I've said, I've encountered a situation whereby an ID is produced to you, but unfortunately the same happens to be maybe a forgery. So it's very important to conduct due diligence, because without it, if anything was to happen later, then you have yourself to blame. So for us advocates, we come in as an insurance, such that if at all something was to happen, you are assured that you can be able, actually you can even follow up with this firm to identify, to establish what happened. If you find out that there is any lapse with the way the transaction was handled, then you can even go to the extent of suing that particular firm. And that's why maybe something else that I need to mention, it's also important that for any firm that you're engaging with, if you choose to instruct an advocate to conduct a transaction, it's also important to understand something called the professional indemnity, because that one, advocates are required to take an indemnity such that in case anything was to happen and maybe a transaction was done not according to how it was supposed to be done, then that will mean that advocate can be able to pay you. Because now there are some transactions which involve millions of monies. So, and maybe the advocate might not have it. But if an advocate has an indemnity, then that means if at all he won't pay, then the insurance steps in. So basically for us, we are supposed to ensure that first the title is genuine, and that the person who is selling the property to you is also the person actually is the registered owner.
And on that note, we are going to take a short break, but when we return back, we will be talking about how you can resolve a situation or rather a scenario whereby one has purchased a land in irregular ways. So we are going to have that discussion, but don't go away. We are taking a very short break. We'll be right back.
Our world needs humble, confident, bold, and integrity-infused leaders.
Live online, Thursday through Friday, October 14th and 15th, 2021. Join thousands of curious, growth-minded, change-driven men and women like you for the premier leadership event of 2021, the Global Leadership Summit. Some of the world-class faculty includes Craig Goshel, Senior Pastor of Life Church, Jami Lima, Richard Montanes, who started off as a janitor and rose to be a top executive. Local faculty include Justice Daniel Musinga, who'll talk about the quest for justice, fairness, and equality. Bishop David Oginde, CEO and founder, the Carter Lead Associate. Daniel Kamau, CEO, Fusion Capital. Archbishop Eliud Wabukala, Chairperson, Ethics and Anti-Corruption Committee. Among other speakers, guest musician will be Florence Morethi. To register, call 722-490325 or visit www.kenyaleadership.org. Everyone wins when a leader gets better.
A staggering number of students who head to college confessing Christ are no longer active in their faith by the time they graduate.
What are your biggest questions about life? Have you ever had a question in the Bible that you were afraid to ask because you thought people would not respond well? Is believing the Bible a great cop-out in the face and absence of evidence, or is it the Word of God? Can the Bible be defended? How to find out the answers to these questions, join us for the Wise Summit 2021, designed to help young people understand the Bible as God's Word and be able to articulate why Jesus stands tall above all other gods. The Lamp and Light Bible Conference will take place in Rift Valley region, Elbagon Presbytery Molo Parish from 7th to 9th October 2021. You can also watch it live Youth Tuko Facebook page. Wise Summit 2021, 119 degrees hot.
Hello and welcome back to our program on Know Your Laws, where we are talking today on matters to do with property purchase. And as we had spoken on the first bit of this program, is that property purchase entails so much legalities and procedures that you have to follow before eventually claiming that this is your property. And with me is my advocate of the High Court of Kenya, that is Wakabu Njunge. And as we continue with our discussion, let me ask you a very important question. You realize that you've purchased a land, or rather property, wrongly. Where do you pick it from at that point?
Now, once you realize that you've bought a property illegally, let's first agree that if at all the documents that you had were fraudulent, they were fraudulently acquired, it may not be possible to register that particular transaction at Land's office. So basically, if maybe, I'm assuming in this particular instance, the transaction is still ongoing, and you see there are some people who will insist on you paying like 50% deposit when it comes deposit on the purchase, and you see in such a case, that will mean that you have given away most of the money. So maybe at the time that you expected to receive all the documents, you realize, alas, maybe the title that this guy had presented to be, and maybe because of your lack of due diligence, it was a fake title. Maybe the ID documents which had been presented to you, and unfortunately you failed to conduct your due diligence, it's also a fake document. So the first thing that you're supposed to do, because as I've said, I think you'll have noted that I've insisted so much on fraud, because if at all someone presents to you documents and intimates that they can be able to sell a property to you while knowing too well that that is not their property, that person has committed a fraud. So in that case, you're supposed to immediately report that matter to the police station. Actually, there is a branch that was formed just to deal with the frauds when it comes to land. So that shows you the extent to which fraud when it comes to land has gone. So basically, when you confirm that, you indeed confirm that indeed someone maybe committed a fraudulent act, the first thing you're supposed to do is report that particular matter, because now that becomes a police case, and they are the ones who can deal now again with that matter. Definitely, you can also go to the extent of suing that particular person so as to recover the amount that you have already paid, because now when it comes to registration, you'll have a challenge, because the moment you present the documents for registration, the registrar has an obligation to confirm that the documents that are being presented to them are genuine documents. So the moment you present these documents for registration, definitely the registrar is going to flag that particular transaction and stop that particular transaction. So the moment you identify that fraud was committed, you're supposed to report, because that matter becomes a police case, so you're supposed to report that matter immediately, so as to avoid dealing with such a property. Because you see again, maybe if I may add, if an owner was to establish that someone is trying to deal with their property, you know, once an owner confirms, maybe identifies that someone is dealing with my property, definitely they'll also rush to court so as they can get the necessary orders. So you see, if an owner goes to court, they might think that you are part and parcel of that particular transaction, fraudulent transaction. So that's why I'm saying that it's very important that you also inform the officers, the police officers, so that now they can begin the investigation as to how even this particular person obtained a title over that particular property, and also even an ID over that particular property.
So in a case where you made this wrong purchase in the help of a law firm, yes, that helped you purchase, but eventually that property becomes that you purchased it wrongly. Yes. So at this point, who bears the responsibility of the purchase?
No, you see, and that's why I began by saying that when you involve a firm, it's more like an insurance, because an advocate wouldn't commission any transaction without first conducting their due diligence. And due diligence is very important. Actually, I think it's one of the most important things when it comes to buying a property, because without due diligence, you might actually be buying air. So the moment you commission an advocate to act for you in any transaction, basically you are telling them that now my trust is on you. In case anything was to happen, my friend, you are the one to bear the burden. So the moment you instruct an advocate, then that means that in case anything was to go wrong, sometimes it's very possible for there to be a fraud that has been planned even at Land's office. So an advocate might not be able to establish that indeed, because actually I've had instances of people switching files and maybe green cards going missing, then thereafter another one is created which maybe has erroneous entries. So as an advocate, it's more like an insurance that whatever you're doing here is genuine. Now, if at all maybe fraud was to be established later, and an advocate was to show that indeed they conducted their due diligence, and that property at that time, maybe based on the file that was there, it was genuine, and maybe you've also gone to the registrar of persons and confirmed even about the issues of the ID, then that will say that the advocate definitely also trusts on the government entities. So in that particular case, then the advocate can't be held liable. But if at all there was failure on the part of the advocate to do what exactly they were supposed to do, then that will mean that you can sue even that particular firm. And actually even we have a disciplinary tribunal that regulates advocates. So if at all you are caught in such a situation as an advocate, it turns out to be an ugly situation, because you can actually be barred from practicing law. So it's a very serious matter, and that's why I'm saying that due diligence is very important. If at all an advocate committed any act that can be said to be negligent, then they are the ones to bear the cross. But if at all maybe they did everything as per paper, then in that particular case, at least the acts of the advocates can be absolved, and the person who was selling that particular property to you is the one to carry the cross. Mm-hmm.
And now we've talked about person-to-person property purchase, yes, and also involvement of a law firm, yes, and now that is more of locally type of buying. Yes. So in a scenario where a foreigner, or rather someone who doesn't reside in the country, wants to purchase a property here in Kenya, mm-hmm, and if you have received any of those particular cases of property purchase for foreigners, do they have a different procedure that they have to follow before they purchase a property here in Kenya? Or what kind of procedure do they follow to make sure that they also own a property here in Kenya? Because we know there are some foreigners who have properties here in Kenya, there are Kenyans who have properties abroad. So what kind of procedure do the foreigners, again, have to undertake to purchase a property here in Kenya, or do they still follow the same procedure that we follow?
Thank you so much, Sambu, for that question, because in the earlier part of this discussion, I had mentioned something about freehold and leasehold, and again now I think we are also coming into that. Now, first of all, I must confirm that as a foreigner, you can't own freehold property here in Kenya. Freehold, as we had said earlier, is property that you own it forever. It's your property forever. Leasehold is the one that the government gives you a lease. So as a foreigner, the law does not give you that opportunity of owning a freehold property here in Kenya. So when it comes to a foreigner, if you intend on buying any property and you intend on proceeding with with your passport, when it comes to registration, then that transaction might be flagged, and unfortunately, because of the law, then you may not be able to proceed. So that is very important, that as a foreigner you can't own a freehold, but you can still own a freehold. You have to be, that's why maybe approaching a law firm so as to structure your transaction is very important. Because now again, if at all we go to the aspect of incorporating a company, because a company will be a local institution. You know, a company in law, we say it's a legal person. So once you incorporate a company and you follow all the processes that are followed, then you can be able to own a property. But now again, that aside, when it comes to a foreigner, if at all maybe you want to buy a freehold, there is that particular option. But then if you want to buy a leasehold property, the procedure is similar. As long as all your documents are in order, you have your passport. And again, definitely apart from having a passport, you must also have your PIN certificate. So as long as you have all those documents, because you cannot just come to Kenya and decide to buy a property. There are some laws which must be followed. And you see, as a foreigner, since maybe at that particular point you may not have a PIN certificate, and you see the reason why they insist on a PIN certificate is because you can't also obtain a PIN certificate if you've not adhered to some conditions. Maybe you must say whether you are a resident or a non-resident. Then they must also look at your qualification before they give you those documents. Apart now from those documents that you must have as a foreigner, then the process still becomes the same process, because the issue of due diligence, still agreements, the completion days and everything, that one is standard in all transactions.
And for a foreigner, yes, a foreigner who is purely a foreigner, and one who has dual citizenship, do they share the same procedures when it comes to land purchase, or the one with dual citizenship gets favored by the law?
No, if you have a dual citizenship, that means that you also are Kenyan. Then that means that the issue of what I've said about the issue of freehold, that won't apply to you. And maybe just for clarification, a foreigner can't own a freehold, but they can own a leasehold. Because for that one, at least, it's the government that is giving you a lease. And the reason why maybe the government wouldn't want foreigners to own freehold is because they want the population, the Kenyan population, to also enjoy the benefits of having a freehold property. So that is the reason why they can't own a freehold property, but they can own a leasehold. If you are dual citizenship, that means that you are also a Kenyan. So the issue of not owning a freehold property, that won't apply to you. Yes. And
now, because we've talked so much about the procedures and the legal procedures when it comes to purchasing a land, as we conclude, yes, someone intending or someone now in the process of purchasing a property, as an advocate and as a person who has dealt with matters to do with the property purchase, what kind of advice would you give to anyone willing to buy or intending to buy a property at this moment?
What I'll say to anyone who is intending on buying a property here in Kenya is that what I've consistently said about due diligence. Due diligence is very important. Apart from due diligence, framing of the transaction, that is the sale agreement itself, it's also very important to ensure that the transaction captures your aspirations and also the aspirations. If you are buying a property, it covers your aspirations and also the aspirations of someone who is selling. And the reason why I say that it's very important to also look into the aspect of the sale agreement is because this sale agreement informs what is to be done. Even, let's say, because you've had instances whereby someone maybe might be selling a property today, but since today he had a particular challenge, tomorrow someone else approaches them with maybe a bigger offer than yours. Now you see, in such a case, maybe you've already given your deposit. You see, in such a case, that means that if at all, depending with how you framed your agreement, you might end up You can't lose definitely your deposit because the expectation is that such a person is supposed to refund your money. But then there's also the time value for money, because you could have maybe agreed that this transaction is going to take 3 months. If I give you 500,000 today, tomorrow that 500,000, if I could have made use of that particular money, then maybe I'll have obtained more money from it. So there's also that aspect of the sale agreement. So it's very important to first conduct your due diligence and ensure that the sale agreement itself is well framed in such a way that you are well protected. Because for us as advocates, what we normally say is that for any transaction, it should ensure that both parties are covered. It should ensure that the person who is selling the property is well covered, and also the person who is buying that particular property is well covered. So apart from that issue, then there's also the other documentation that you have to ensure that they're in order before you proceed with the transaction. So what I'll say is that due diligence is very important. Also, approaching a law firm is very important, so as to capture your aspirations that is in the sale agreement, and also so that the advocate can also be able to structure your transaction in a way that is favorable to both parties, and also to ensure that the transaction goes to the tail end and the title comes in your name.
Thank you so much for making time to be in our program today to talk about property purchase.
Thank you for having me.
And we wish you all the best. That has been Advocate of the High Court of Kenya, Wakabu Njunge, breaking down the legal procedures that one has to follow before purchasing a property in what he has termed as a very crucial process, whereby you have to conduct due diligence before eventually claiming that this property eventually is owned by you. That has been our episode on property purchase. My name is Chris Sambu. See you on the next episode on Know Your Laws. Goodbye.
Are you looking for affordable land to begin your investment journey? PCA Housing Cooperative Society Limited brings you Baraka Gardens. Baraka Gardens prime plots are located in Juja, one of Nairobi's most sought after towns for investments. The plots are located 1 kilometer from